wanted to take the time to share something I got out of my quiet time today. I was thinking about how we want explanations a lot of times. We want reasons. Why this or why that? What's the meaning in this? Especially, or even as God's people, believers, because we trust that God is sovereign, right? So we know He has a plan and a purpose for us. And whether He has caused or brought about a certain thing directly or just allowed it to come to pass in His permissive will, we're like Job. We want to know why. Why am I going through this? What is the purpose? What's the explanation? What's the reason in all this? What's the outcome? And I had this thought that arose in my spirit that God has not called us to live based upon explanations, but rather He has called us to live based upon His promises. Now, if at once when you hear that, you have a ping, an alarm that trips in your rationale that says, well, that's stupid, that's foolish, that's idiotic, that makes no sense. I understand that reaction. Why do I say I understand it? Because the wisdom of God is foolishness in the sight of man, and vice versa. This is why Paul writes in 1 Corinthians, the natural man, the fleshly man, the carnal man, cannot receive the things of God. He does not understand them. They're foolishness to him, because these things are spiritually discerned. So, we have to be careful where we talk about quote-unquote common sense and faith. What do I mean when I say that? Well, God has not called us to be a foolish people by any means. We're called to be wise, to exercise discernment and correct judgment. But at the same time, sometimes faith, obedience, according to faith, flies in the face of common sense. Take, for instance, Peter stepping out of the boat onto the water to go to Jesus. There's no common sense there. That's completely irrational. But he was being obedient. Take, for instance, Gideon in the Old Testament. Gideon and his army going against the Midianites. Gideon had something like over 30,000 men originally, and they were outnumbered 4-1. And God said, you have too many men. Whittle them down. So they whittled them down to 10,000. God said, you still have too many men. Whittled them down again to just 300, the original bold 300, right? Now why did he do this? Because he didn't want the people boasting in their power, right? He wanted it to be obvious that God delivered them. And they won that army because Gideon was faithful, obedient. But there again, it makes no sense. That's no common sense in there. You want as many men as possible, especially if you're outnumbered from the get-go, right? So, again, God has not called us to live based upon explanations. Rather, He has called us to live based upon His promises.